We anticipate next year we will be conducting multiple weeks of public hearings, setting out for the American people in vivid color exactly what happened every minute of the day on January 6th here at the Capitol and at the White House, and what led to that violent attack.
That was Liz Cheney today with a preview of what we can expect in the new year from the January 6th Select Committee. And according to Chairman Benny Thompson, they have already interviewed 250 witnesses. Meanwhile, contempt proceedings against Trump's former Assistant Attorney General, Jeffrey Clark, are officially underway following the unanimous vote by that committee last night. But in the 11th hour, they also gave Clark one final chance to comply with the subpoena and possibly avert a contempt citation. They agreed to depose him again on Saturday when, according to his lawyer, Clark is expected to assert his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. But can we just back up for a second and put a pin in that? Just allow it to sink in your own mind. A former Justice Department official is pleading the Fifth. That's a big deal. It's not an admission of guilt in the literal sense, but it means that Clark, who used to be part of the Department of Justice, reasonably believes that he could be prosecuted for scheming with Trump and others to overturn the 2020 election. That is not a thing that happens often, if ever. And let's not forget what Clark's would-be co-conspirator once said about people who take the Fifth.
The mob takes the Fifth. If you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment?
Joining me now is Congressman Adam Schiff of California. He's a member of the House Select Committee on the January 6th attack and chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. And thank you, Congressman Schiff, for being here. I'm just going to read a little bit from Jeffrey Clark's letter to your committee. And it says here, Mr. Clark has a reasonable basis for believing that his testimony before the committee could be used against him in a criminal prosecution. I personally have never heard of a former Justice Department official who apparently reasonably believes that he either did commit a crime or would be accused of one. Have you? And how big of a deal is that in your mind?
You know, I would have to go back to see during Watergate whether there were high-ranking Justice Department officials or the Attorney General himself at the time who took the Fifth. I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but you're right, Joy. It is extraordinary. He was not just a Department of Justice employee. He was at the top of the Justice Department. Reportedly, he, was in contention with Trump to be the Attorney General. And for him now, apparently, to take a position that if he is forthcoming with the committee and testifies and answers certain questions, he may be implicated in criminal activity. It's a pretty breathtaking thing. But then again, we saw a lot of that during the Trump administration.
If he comes in this weekend and takes the Fifth, is this going to be a televised hearing? Because I almost feel like it's incumbent upon those of you who are in our government to let us see our former Justice Department official taking the Fifth. If he does that, is he going to have to do that televised?
Well, the deposition will be private like the other depositions. And, we'll ask him a series of questions on a number of topics of deep interest to the committee. He will be required to identify as to each question the basis of any refusal to testify. Now, he has given us in his prior appearance before the committee a litany of reasons, I think all bogus, as to why he would not answer our questions. Interestingly, Joy, at that prior appearance before the committee, he never suggested that his answers would incriminate him, and that was the basis he was refusing. That was new. That was something that came out only on the eve of being held in contempt. Whether this is a stratagem to further delay or obfuscate, whether there's a good faith belief on his part that if he testifies truthfully, it would incriminate him in potential criminal activity, we're going to try to find out on Saturday. But we do take the Fifth Amendment very seriously. At the same time, the Fifth Amendment does not allow him, if the information would intend to incriminate him personally, to cover up for the former president.
If you ask him, for instance, did you talk to the former president about delaying or stopping the certification of the election or schemes to do so, and he says no, does that fall, in your view, into the parameters of something that he couldn't say? Because just asking whether you spoke to somebody doesn't sound like you're implicating them in a crime necessarily.
Well, I'm not sure precisely what basis Mr. Clark will be asserting the Fifth. That is, what crimes does he think that he may have been involved in, that if he testified truthfully, that it could tend to incriminate him. So, we will need, or he will need rather, a factual basis for any assertion of the Fifth. And, we will look at his testimony. We will look at questions where there is no conceivable Fifth Amendment privilege. If he still refuses to testify, on the basis of some other bogus claim, such as his first appearance before the committee, then he will remain potentially subject to contempt.
We know now that Mark Meadows, Donald Trump's former chief of staff, is now cooperating, at least reportedly, with the committee. Let's just say that each of these men come in, and their version of cooperation is to come in and just all plead the fifth. What then? What recourse will this committee have to get to the truth if people walk in and, like some of them have done, just walk back out, or plead the fifth and do not give you the information that the committee needs to get to the truth?
Well, there are a range of potential remedies if that's the case. If it is clearly a bad faith invocation, and there's, frankly, difficulty in demonstrating that, but there may be questions, for example, where there's no conceivable factual basis, then, again, they could expose themselves to criminal contempt. We might use civil litigation to resolve some issues along those lines. We could also seek criminal contempt on other questions that he refuses to answer where he is not asserting the fifth. And then finally, there is the potential remedy of a testimonial immunity, which wouldn't give immunity if he committed crimes and he was subject to prosecution by some entity, but would merely say that his testimony in that proceeding couldn't be used against him. Now, that's one reason why, frankly, Joy, to do that in private, so that it would protect any potential prosecution. We don't want to interfere with anything the Justice Department might be doing, or the Fulton County DA or anyone else. So there are a range of options that we'd have to consider.